There's a kind of video that changes when you know the ending. At first, it is just footage, a routine traffic stop, a couple pulled over on the side of a road, a police officer asking calm questions. But then weeks later, the same video becomes something else. Every pause becomes suspicious. Every smile feels wrong. Every apology feels heavier than it did the first time. On August 12, 2021, police body cameras in Moab, Utah, recorded a roadside encounter with a young woman named Gabby Petito and her fiancé, Brian Laundrie. At the time, there was no national attention, no headline, no crowds, no true crime community analyzing the footage frame by frame. It was just a domestic dispute call, a traffic stop, a decision, and a separation for the night. And now that footage is one of the most analyzed police videos of the modern era, because it captured a moment that looks ordinary, but in hindsight, feels like a warning. Tonight, we're going to go through the Gabby Petito case slowly, not through rumors, not through viral posts, not through unverified theories. We are going to walk through what is known, what is documented, and what the timeline tells us. And as we do, keep one question in mind. If warning signs are real, why do they so often look like nothing at all? Title on screen, music swells, cut to black. This story is difficult because it is familiar. It is about young love and a road trip. It is about social media and curated happiness. It is about two people in a small van, under big stress, far from home. But it is also about something darker. It is about how conflict is interpreted by strangers, how calmness can be mistaken for innocence, how emotional distress can be mistaken for guilt, and how the systems designed to keep people safe often work best when danger is obvious and visible. Gabby Petito was 22 years old. Her case became international news when she was reported missing in September 2021 after traveling across the United States with Brian Laundrie in a van life trip. The timeline that followed included the discovery of her remains in Wyoming on September 19, 2021, and the determination that her death was a homicide. Later, the FBI stated the investigation did not identify anyone other than Brian Laundrie as directly involved. Those are the broad facts, but the power of this case is not just in what happened, it is in what happened in public view. Because before the story became a search, before it became a nationwide investigation, before it became a symbol, there was that roadside stop. And in that stop, there are details that millions of people now see as warning signs. Tonight, we are going to reconstruct the story in chapters. We will return to key moments more than once, because that is how real understanding works. A timeline tells you what happened, but a story tells you what it meant. And this story is full of moments that meant nothing until it was too late. Before Gabby Petito became a name in the news, she was a person with plans. She was building an identity online. She was chasing a lifestyle that millions of young people recognize immediately: freedom, beauty, movement, meaning. There's a reason van life content performs so well. It sells the idea that you can escape the job you do not love, escape the bills that never end, escape the pressure to be conventional. A van is small, yes, but in the dream, the world becomes wide. On social media, Gabby's posts fit the style of the time. Bright, minimal, aesthetic, hopeful. And from the outside, they looked like a pair chasing the same dream. A couple traveling through national parks, recording their journey, turning their days into a story. And that part was real. They really were on the road. They really were traveling. They really were posting. But what social media cannot show you is the emotional weather inside a relationship. You can film a sunset, but you cannot film tension. You can photograph smiles, but you cannot capture what happened 30 minutes earlier. And when people look back at this case, they often say a version of the same thing. Everything looked fine until it wasn't. So the question becomes, when did it stop being fine? A van life trip is not a vacation. It is a lifestyle. It is constant proximity. It is waking up inches from the same person every day. It is planning meals, finding showers, dealing with heat, dealing with money, dealing with lost service, and it is doing all of it without the normal space that couples rely on. Most relationships survive conflict because there is space. One person goes to work, one person goes to another room. Someone takes a walk, Someone calls a friend. In a van, conflict has nowhere to go. It sits between you. Now add the pressure of content creation. If your brand is happiness, you cannot post the fight. If your brand is peace, you cannot show the breakdown. If your brand is romance, you cannot reveal the ugly parts. So what happens? People perform the dream while living the stress. This does not mean every van trip is dangerous, but it does mean the conditions can intensify existing issues. And in many relationships, the most dangerous shift is not loud violence. It is the subtle movement of power. Who speaks for whom? Who decides the plan? Who controls the mood? Sometimes control is obvious, sometimes it is invisible, and sometimes it looks like calm. Hold on to that, because calm is one of the most important themes in the Bodycam footage. August 12th, 2021, the call, the stop, the curb. We are now at the day that changed everything. On August 12th, 2021, police in Moab, Utah, responded after a report of a couple fighting. A witness described seeing conflict near a business, and that report triggered police attention. Officers located the van, and then the body cameras turned on. What you see first is not a crime scene. You see a roadside, you see sun, you see dust. You see an officer approaching. Then you see Gabby. She is sitting on a curb, crying. She is struggling to speak clearly. She apologizes repeatedly. The officer asks questions that feel normal. Where are you headed? What happened today? Are you okay? And Gabby responds in a way that will later haunt viewers. She blames herself. She describes anxiety. She describes being overwhelmed. She frames the incident as her fault. Meanwhile, Brian appears calm. He talks. He explains. He uses a tone that sounds reasonable. This contrast is crucial, because in moments like this, the system often trusts the calm person more than the emotional person. Not because the system is evil, not because officers want harm, but because credibility is unconsciously attached to composure. If you seem calm, you seem reliable. If you seem distressed, you seem unstable. And what makes this case so unsettling is that you can watch this dynamic forming in real time. The officer tries to assess what happened. The officer separates them. The officer listens, and slowly the narrative solidifies. Gabby becomes the problem to manage. Brian becomes the person describing the problem. And here is the part that is hard to say out loud, but important to acknowledge. In many abusive dynamics, the victim is the one who looks chaotic, because they are living inside a constant emotional threat. And the controller often looks calm, because they feel in control. Calm can be a mask, calm can be power, calm can be practice. But in real time, without hindsight, calm just looks like calm. So officers decide the best approach is separation. Brian is placed in a hotel for the night, Gabby stays with the van, and the stop ends. No arrest, no charges filed, the camera turns off, and the story continues forward into silence. When the case became national news, the Bodycam footage was released publicly. And then something happened that only occurs in the modern era. The public became a jury of emotion. Millions watched it, then they watched it again, then they watched it slowed down, then they watched commentary, then they watched reaction videos. Why did that video become so magnetic? Because it offered a human mystery, not a whodunit, a why did nobody see it? When you watch the footage, the feeling is not horror, it is confusion, because nothing looks like a clear emergency. It looks like a couple having a bad day. But the details are what trap you. Gabby's apologizing, her trying to regulate her breathing, her describing herself as the problem. And then Brian, the calmness, the polite tone, the small laughs. You can feel the imbalance, even if you cannot prove it. And that is why this case created so much debate. Some people saw Gabby as a victim in that moment. Some people saw two young people in mutual conflict. Some people focused on the police decision. But almost everyone felt the same unease. That something about the interaction did not feel right. And the hardest part is this. Even if you feel it, you still might not be able to act on it, because the system needs evidence, not vibes. But human lives do not always give you clear evidence. Sometimes all you get is a curb, a camera, and a young woman saying she is sorry for being upset. And then weeks later, you realize that might have been the last chance. After August 12th, the trip continues. This is where many true crime stories become frustrating, because the public wants a clear turning point, a moment where everything changed. But life rarely works like that. Often, tragedy is not one dramatic switch. It is a gradual narrowing of options. There are social media posts. There are snapshots of normalcy, and then communication slows. Gabby's family later reports that she is not responding the way she normally would, and eventually, the contact stops. In many missing persons cases, the scariest period is not the search, it is the transition into silence. Because silence is ambiguous. Silence could mean no service, silence could mean stress, silence could mean someone needed space, or silence could mean control. In this case, silence becomes central. Because by the time Gabby is reported missing, Brian is already back in Florida. He returned alone on September 1st, 2021, driving the van, and he does not publicly explain Gabby's absence. This is the moment where the story becomes impossible to ignore. A couple went on a trip, one person came back, one person did not, and the person who returned would not say where the missing person was. The public felt it immediately. This was no longer a relationship drama, it was a crisis. Gabby Petito was officially reported missing on September 11, 2021. Once that report happened, the timeline tightened. Everything that had been vague became urgent. Search efforts began, law enforcement involvement increased, and media attention exploded, partly because the story had a modern hook: social media, van life, visible footage, and an already existing audience that felt invested. This is also where the true crime ecosystem activated. People compared dates, mapped routes, analyzed posts. But while the internet moved fast, law enforcement had to move methodically. And the center of the story remained Brian Laundrie, a person of interest who did not speak publicly, who returned alone, and who now became the focus of the investigation. Then, he disappeared. This is where the story shifts from tragic to surreal. Because now, not only was Gabby missing, the person who might have known what happened was missing too. On September 19, 2021, authorities discovered remains in Wyoming that were believed to be Gabby Petito, and the family was notified. Her death was later ruled a homicide. When that determination became public, the tone changed across the entire country. Hope shifted into grief, speculation shifted into anger, and the Bodycam footage shifted again. Because now, the footage was no longer simply a strange moment. It was a moment in a homicide timeline, and people returned to it with a question that cuts deep. What if someone had interpreted that stop differently? Not as a simple argument, not as a mental health moment, not as two people stressed on a road trip, but as a warning sign of escalation. The difficulty is that none of us get to rerun time, and law enforcement does not operate on hypotheticals, but the public operates on emotion, and emotionally, that footage felt like a door that closed quietly behind her. Because Brian Laundrie's whereabouts became a national focus. After weeks of searching, Brian Laundrie's remains were found in Florida in October 2021. Later, the FBI provided a final investigative update stating that they did not identify any other individuals besides Brian as directly involved in Gabby's death. The case closed legally in a way that often leaves the public unsatisfied. Because there was no trial, no courtroom testimony, no full accounting in front of a jury. Instead, there were documents, statements, and an ending that left people with grief and unresolved anger. And because there was no courtroom narrative, the Bodycam footage took on even more weight. It became the closest thing the public had to a live look at the dynamic. The story did not end with the discovery of Gabby. It expanded. This case became a national conversation for many reasons, but there are two that matter most. First, it placed a spotlight on the complexity of domestic violence and coercive control. Not all abuse looks like bruises. Sometimes it looks like emotional dominance, isolation, power over perception. The person with control often appears calm, polite, reasonable. The person without control often appears messy, distressed, apologetic. In a public interaction, the calm person usually wins. Second, it revealed the limitations of systems. Police officers must make decisions quickly. They have to classify events. They have to follow statutes. But human relationships do not fit clean categories. And when you watch the Moab footage, the sense you get is not that anyone wanted harm. It is that nobody knew what to call what they were seeing. And when you cannot name something, you cannot address it effectively. That is why this case is taught, discussed, referenced, not as a simple failure story, but as a case study in how danger hides inside normalcy. One reason this case felt different is because it unfolded in real time online. There was an audience watching, tracking, reacting, tips poured in, leads were crowdsourced, footage was found. The public attention became part of the landscape of the investigation. And that comes with a paradox. Sometimes the crowd helps, sometimes it harms, sometimes it turns tragedy into entertainment. The challenge for creators in this niche, including you if you are making this video, is to hold the line between storytelling and exploitation. This script is written to be intense without being sensational, because the goal is not to shock with detail. The goal is to build suspense through understanding, through the slow realization of how a normal day can be a turning point. If you ask people what they remember from this case, many will mention the same image. Gabby on the curb, crying, apologizing. It is a simple image, but it became symbolic because it captures something deeply human. That feeling of trying to keep things together while your world is quietly coming apart. And it raises one final question. How many people have sat on a curb like that, unseen in their distress, because it did not look like the kind of danger we know how to respond to? This case became famous because it was documented. But the pattern is not rare. The pattern is often invisible, and that is why people still talk about Gabby Petito, not only because of what happened to her, but because of what the footage revealed about how easily warning signs are misread. Gabby Petito's death was ruled a homicide, and the FBI later stated their investigation did not identify anyone other than Brian Laundrie as directly involved. Those lines are the official conclusion. But the emotional conclusion is different. The emotional conclusion is a video that millions cannot forget. A curb, a camera, a young woman blaming herself for being upset, and the uncomfortable realization that sometimes the most important warning signs do not look like emergencies. They look like a normal day on the side of the road. If you or someone you know is experiencing relationship violence or coercive control, resources exist, and reaching out can be a first step. Thank you for watching, and please take care of yourself. If you enjoyed this documentary and you want more videos like this, don't leave without subscribing. Hit like, subscribe, and comment below if you loved the video. It takes a second, but it makes a huge difference for the channel.